Section 19, Legal Hotline Q&A, Arizona Fair Housing 101, When Safety and Fair Housing Meet. As Sarah continued building her business, she noticed a pattern. "David," she said one afternoon, "many of the fair housing questions I receive don't come from agents." "Who do they come from?" David asked. "Sellers, landlords, HOAs, and property managers." David smiled. "Exactly. Fair housing doesn't just affect real estate licensees. It affects nearly everyone involved in housing." He reached for another legal hotline folder. Let's look at a few more real-world situations. Legal hotline question number 1. Can a property manager require only families with children to install a pool fence? Question. A property management company requires every tenant with children to install a removable swimming pool fence at the tenant's expense. Adult tenants without children are not required to do the same. Is this policy consistent with fair housing laws? David explained that familial status is a protected class under the Fair Housing Act. A housing provider should not impose additional rental requirements, restrictions, or conditions solely because a household includes children unless specifically required by law. If everyone renting the property isn't required to follow the same rule, David explained, you should immediately ask whether the policy treats families differently. Sarah nodded. So safety is important. It is. But fair housing requires equal treatment. Arizona broker tip: property safety requirements should generally be applied consistently and should comply with applicable state and local laws, not based solely on whether children live in the home. Legal hotline question number 2. Can a licensee advertise singles only? Question. A real estate licensee owns an owner-occupied property with a small studio apartment. The licensee wants to advertise single person only. Is this acceptable? David explained that while certain owner-occupied housing may qualify for limited exemptions under the Fair Housing Act, those exemptions do not permit discriminatory advertising by a real estate licensee. Advertising that expresses a preference based upon a protected characteristic may violate fair housing laws. The advertisement itself becomes the problem, David explained. It doesn't matter whether someone eventually rents the property. Sarah smiled. So the ad can violate the law before anyone even applies. Exactly. Broker tip: describe the features of the property, not the type of person you hope will rent or purchase it. Legal hotline question number 3. Can a seller refuse to show a home to a buyer who uses a wheelchair? Question. A buyer's agent schedules a showing during a rainy day. The seller learns the buyer uses a wheelchair and refuses to allow the showing because they are concerned about damage to the flooring. May the seller refuse the showing? David explained that refusing to allow a qualified buyer to view a property because of the buyer's disability would likely violate fair housing laws. Although sellers certainly have legitimate concerns about protecting their property, those concerns must be addressed in a manner that treats all buyers equally. The answer isn't refusing the showing, David explained. The answer is finding a reasonable way to protect the property while still providing equal access. Sarah smiled. So maybe protective floor coverings or another practical solution. Exactly. Equal opportunity, not exclusion. Arizona broker tip: if a seller asks you to refuse showings because of a buyer's disability, immediately explain your fair housing obligations and involve your designated broker before taking any action. Legal hotline question number 4. Must a seller build a pool fence because the buyer has children? Question. A buyer submits an offer on a home with a swimming pool. Because the buyer has young children, the offer requests that the seller install a pool fence before closing. Must the seller accept the request? Answer. No. David explained that fair housing laws do not require a seller to construct improvements simply because a buyer has children. Instead, requests involving safety improvements become part of the normal contract negotiations. The seller may agree, counter the request, or decline it entirely. Fair housing protects equal housing opportunities, David explained. It doesn't require one party to pay for improvements requested by the other. Sarah nodded. So that's simply a contract issue. Exactly. As long as the decision isn't based on discrimination. What Sarah learned? Sarah closed the legal hotline folder. I've noticed something. David smiled. I was waiting for it. Almost every fair housing question involves balancing two things. What are they? While still allowing buyers, sellers, landlords, and property managers to make legitimate business decisions. David nodded. That's one of the biggest lessons in this course. Fair housing doesn't eliminate business judgment. It simply requires that business decisions never be based on unlawful discrimination. Sarah smiled. I think I'm finally starting to understand the difference. David laughed. And that's exactly what experienced brokers learn. Arizona broker tip: Whenever a client asks you to make an exception because of a person's disability, children, race, religion, national origin, sex, or another protected characteristic, pause before responding. Ask yourself whether the decision is based on a legitimate business reason that applies equally to everyone, or whether it treats someone differently because of a protected class. That simple question can prevent many fair housing violations before they occur. Online discussion question 1. Why can a housing policy that applies only to families with children create fair housing concerns? Answer: because familial status is a protected class. Policies that impose additional conditions or restrictions only on households with children may be considered discriminatory, unless required by law or otherwise legally justified. Question 2. Why is advertising often the first place where fair housing violations occur? Answer: advertisements can unlawfully express preferences or limitations regarding who should buy or rent a property. Licensees should focus on describing the property rather than the type of person they hope to attract. Question 3. How can a seller protect their property while still complying with fair housing laws? Sellers may use reasonable, non-discriminatory methods to protect their property, such as requiring shoe covers for all visitors or using floor protection, provided those measures are applied consistently and do not deny equal access based on a protected characteristic.